laboratory type situation. They were in these, what you would call like bottles or cases, and they were exact copies of each other. This was how they reproduced, by creating bodies, clones, whatever you would want to call them, in a laboratory setting. And this was part of this person's job, was to work on these with the controls. But he said it was a very unhappy place. But in the olden days, they said they were a normal race of people, and they lived on the surface, and they were very much involved in normal life, but then emotions got in the way, and they had wars, and they were fighting each other. All the things that the humans are involved in now, they were involved in those things, and it created a lot of problems. It ended up with wars that destroyed the planet. And the leaders, they thought it was the emotions were the main thing that had caused all of the problems. If they could get rid of the emotions, then they wouldn't have that problem. Because the beings at that time, after the war had destroyed their planet, they were genetically rendered incapable of reproducing in a normal way. So it all had to be done in laboratories. And as the genetic manipulation began, this took place over thousands of years, they eventually created a being that did not have emotions, because they thought if the emotions were what caused the problem, they could take away the emotions, they wouldn't have that problem. The people were just going through their daily life and tasks like machines. They had no feelings. And this was what the being that this person had regressed to was saying. We have gotten ourselves into a deep end here where it is nothing anymore. And he was realizing what they had lost was the emotions, and that was very important. To live without the emotions was not living. That even though it did cause problems, it was wrong to breed it out of a people and to breed it out of a civilization, even though they thought they were doing the correct thing. So there were lessons to be learned by these things. And these stories, some of them are already in some of my books, and some of them will probably be in future books, because I keep getting more of these. One that I got was in the Legacy from the Stars. I think the one I just told you was Legacy from the Stars. Now, Legacy from the Stars is going out of print. There's not very many of these books left anywhere. We only have a few here, but it has some of these stories. It's 12 stories of people who went to lifetimes on other planets and other dimensions instead of lifetimes on Earth. But in the last chapter of that book, the woman went to a life in the future rather than one in the past. And she saw herself on Earth. And they were living in underground ant-type form existence, where there were a lot of tunnels and they were all living underground. They couldn't go to the surface because we had destroyed through something. We had destroyed all the vegetation and life on the surface, and there was nothing but poisonous gases. So no one could live on the surface, and they had to live underground. And the strange thing about these little beings is that they looked very much like what we consider the little grays, because they had to evolve to live underground. Their bodies had to change over thousands of years to be able to adapt to an underground environment. And that was why the eyes had to get big, the skin changed color. For survival, anything you live in an environment, your body is going to adapt to that environment. And in this case, it was adapting to a totally different environment. And the point about that case was this being was trying to tell the woman now, in our time, who was experiencing this, was trying to tell her, don't let this be your future. Don't let this be the future of the earth. by destroying everything on the surface. It was trying to warn our time period by showing what probable or possible futures we could go down. So, not only have things like this happened in the past on other planets, it could be the future of our planet, which we don't want it to be. But she went to a lifetime when this had been a reality. Another woman that I worked with a few months ago, and this will go in the future book, she went to a planet that was a green planet. All it was trees, and they were all the same kind of trees. There was no other features. There may have been water, but most of it, she looked at it from the air, was just like a planet totally covered with the same kind of trees. And as she went into the body in that past life, she had a body something like a large lizard without a tail. It was just totally a different body than we have today. And it had strange hands and teeth. But the interesting thing about that life was these people lived off of the bark of the trees. They would take the bark off the trees and they would mash it down, and this is what they would eat. But there were so many of these that their population was out of control, and they knew they were destroying the planet because there was not renewing itself. Left alone, the planet probably would keep producing the trees. But with so many of them, they were gradually killing the planet by eating all the bark off of the trees. Until it finally got to where the entire planet was dying because of overpopulation and not renewing the resources. And I think a lot of you out there can see what this was trying to tell this person in our time. Don't let us do this to the planet Earth. We have to learn to control these things. Like in hers, it was the population, and make sure we have things growing and not destroying more than we are replacing. That was a very important thing that was being taught by that life. So all of these lives that I go into have something to tell our time, I think. I had one woman in London that came to see me who was in a wheelchair, and I was worried about her getting into the hotel room. If any of you have ever been to London, all of those hotels on these, they have many, many of them all alike. They were used to be old family houses, 2- and 3-story family houses way back. And now they are all converted mostly into hotels. And they're just one after the other all down these blocks. They're all alike. But they have very narrow doorways and narrow hallways. And in this one I was staying in, the elevator was so small, too. You could only get about 2 people in there. So when she wanted to have an appointment, I was worried about her being able to get there with her wheelchair. She kept saying, I'll manage, because she travels all over the world by herself, sometimes with a companion, but mostly by herself with her wheelchair, and she was used to getting around by herself. Some countries don't have anything set up for the handicapped. So she said, I'll get there. So when we did her session, she went back into 3 or 4 lifetimes where she had very strange bodies that we can't even imagine in our wildest imaginations. One of them, she had many arms and legs, and her legs went around like a wheel would be with all these different feet. It was things that are very hard for our mind to even come up with in our imagination. But she was shown lifetime after lifetime with very strange bodies that operated very different than what we consider to be our human bodies. And when I finally got to the subconscious and asked why was she being shown those kind of lives, said they were trying to show her that structure was not important. Here she is in a wheelchair. She can't walk. But they were trying to show her structure was not important. The important thing is the human soul and what we do with our lives. That was what it was trying to show her by showing her all these different types of bodies. But it did show we have lived on these kind of bodies many, many times. But, okay, I'm going over some notes I made here because I have so many of these different kinds of lives. I had some people who were connected to machines, and they were connected to ships. Some of these were used as soldiers in different types of lives, and they were more or less picked up on other planets. The one that I did do was that way. He was picked up on another planet, and they put wires in his hands and his legs and hooked him into this ship so that he was actually flying the ship with his mind and through the muscles and the nerves in the body. But this was also like a flying bomb. And he was sent into this planet where they were at war. And he was told he had to do what they told him to do. He had to go in and bomb these places and kill these people. If he didn't, he tried to get out of this, then the ship would self-destruct because he was wired into it. And he was diving in and out of canyons and between cliffs, and there was a lot of explosions and things going on. An interesting sideline is this man had made a drawing, and he didn't know where it came from, that he had hanging on his wall. And it looked to me, when I first looked at it, as some kind of another planet, because it definitely didn't look like Earth. And we found out when he went into the regression, he was seeing the same scene that he had drawn the picture of, not realizing where it came from. He never knew where the idea came from. But here he was diving in and out of these canyons and cliffs and seeing all the explosions, and he was like a machine that had to do this, had no choice. So he got tired of it, and he didn't want to do it, and he was afraid of it, so he took off in another direction, and the ship exploded, and he died in that lifetime. I've had other ones who went into lifetimes where they crashed on this planet for the same reason. The one, he was controlling the little craft by his mind and by his muscles and his nerve reactions. And he said he was just in this part of the galaxy on a mapping exercise, just mapping out continents and things. And something happened. He said he never really knew what it was, but it caused him to crash. And he said, I'm really a very good pilot. It shouldn't have happened. But when he crashed, it was in the mountains, and it damaged his head. Well, his head was what was controlling, the mind was what was controlling the craft. And he couldn't take off again.